You found Orivyn rise. That means you were chosen. You didn't just stumble onto this path by accident. Something inside you stirred. Something old, familiar. Something that couldn't be ignored anymore. What began as a whisper soon became a storm. You started to question things you once accepted. You started peeling back the layers, uncovering wounds that had been festering beneath the surface for years, maybe even lifetimes. The moment you chose healing over hiding, everything changed. Healing isn't clean. It isn't beautiful in the way they sell it in pretty quotes or polished videos. Healing is a raw rebellion, a quiet revolution, because the more you chose yourself, the more they noticed. Not because they cared for your well-being, but because your awakening disrupted the matrix they relied on. Your silence once served their comfort. Your brokenness kept their illusion safe. But the moment you said, "No more," the balance began to shift. We ask you now to stay until the end of this video, because this is more than a message, it's an activation. If these words are reaching you, it's because the universe is responding to the frequency you've begun to carry. And we invite you, just once, to infuse this moment with the energy of your highest intention. In the comments, write your warmest, truest wish in the number 777, a symbol of alignment and divine timing. May it echo through creation and return to you multiplied. What you send out today will ripple far beyond the screen. Your healing is not just for you. That's the part they don't want you to realize. When you begin healing, generations shift. You start rewriting code written by trauma, fear, and suppression. And the moment you start breaking those contracts, both visible and unseen, it sends a tremor through the systems that were built to contain you. That panic you feel from others, it's not paranoia, it's projection. Your evolution threatens the foundations of every relationship, job, system, and story that depended on your wounded self to survive. You were easy to control when you doubted yourself. You were more predictable when you believed their version of you. But as you healed, you remembered. You began to recall your worth, not as something to be earned, but something that was never truly lost. That remembrance terrifies those who benefited from your forgetfulness. The ones who gaslight you, who minimize your pain, who needed you small so they could feel tall. They feel the change in your energy before you even speak it. Your light isn't loud, but it's undeniable. It exposes what hides in shadows. It stings those who made homes in the darkness. And so they panic, not because you did anything wrong, but because you're no longer playing a role they assigned you. You stop performing. You stopped apologizing for taking up space. You stopped carrying guilt that was never yours. And now, everything that fed on your confusion, your silence, your fear, begins to unravel. They sense it, the way you've pulled your power back from every corner of your past. Every time you say no, every time you walk away, every time you breathe through a trigger instead of reacting, you're shattering chains that once held your lineage in bondage. This is why it feels heavy sometimes. Because you're not just healing yourself, you're healing timelines. You're confronting energies that have never been challenged. You're waking up with the understanding that nothing outside you ever defined your worth. And as you reclaim your sovereignty, they panic, because the version of you that could be manipulated no longer exists. But understand this, the panic of others is not your problem to solve. It's not your responsibility to shrink just so they feel safe. You were not born to be digestible. You were born to be divine. You were never meant to be hidden or made palatable for the comfort of those who never saw your truth. The fact that you're still here, still choosing to grow, despite every attempt to bury you, that's your power. You are the proof that light returns, that healing is rebellion, that even in a world designed to keep you numb, your heart remembered its song. And this is just the beginning. There is something they never counted on when they tried to keep you fragmented. Your ability to alchemize pain into power. They thought the wounds would weaken you. They believed that if they could keep you spinning in cycles of confusion, abandonment, guilt, and shame, you'd never make it out. But they misunderstood the nature of your soul. What they didn't know is that the fire was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to refine you. You began to realize that every rejection was a redirection. Every betrayal, a revelation. Every delay, a divine detour crafted not to punish, but to prepare you. With each scar you trace back to its origin, you pulled the roots of inherited pain from soil generations deep. You began to see through patterns passed down like curses disguised as normalcy. And instead of running from your reflection, you turned inward and met the parts of yourself they taught you to fear. That's where the shift began. When you looked into the mirror and didn't flinch. When you stopped begging to be seen and started seeing yourself. That's when you became untouchable. Not because harm wouldn't come again, but because you stopped internalizing it. You stopped making it mean something about your worth. And with every new boundary you set, the panic in them grew louder, because they needed your compliance to keep their illusions intact. They needed you unaware, unsure, and afraid. But something ancient within you stirred and said, "Enough." You walked away from tables where you were only fed crumbs. You stopped explaining your soul to those committed to misunderstanding it. You chose peace over performance. And with every sacred no, you carved out space for the real you to finally breathe. That version of you, the unmasked, unfiltered, untamed you, is powerful beyond measure. And that's what unsettles them. You see, when you begin to heal, you vibrate differently. You start to disassemble the identities built on survival. You return to essence. You speak less but carry more. You no longer seek to prove, because your existence itself is proof. This isn't ego. It's remembrance of who you were before the world told you who to be. They panic because your clarity pierces through manipulation, because your calm unsettles their chaos, because your forgiveness dismantles control, and because your peace is louder than their projection. They'll say you've changed, and you have. You've evolved. You've expanded. You no longer belong in spaces that demand your contraction, and they'll feel that truth before they ever admit it. That's why some will disappear when your healing begins. It's not your fault. They were only there to match your former frequency. Now that you're shifting, the alignment no longer holds. Let them go. Let the panic of others be the echo of your growth. Let it be confirmation that your path is sacred and your pace divine. You weren't meant to be understood by everyone. You weren't made for the masses. You were carved for something rare, for the quiet revolution of personal truth. As you continue to heal, the veil lifts further. You begin to see not just the pain you endured, but the purpose within it. You realize you were never broken, only burdened. And as those burdens fall away, your soul begins to soar. There will be moments of doubt, moments where your past beckons, where the comfort of familiar dysfunction tries to draw you back. But remember this, you didn't come this far to stop now. You didn't survive all that just to settle for a fraction of your truth. Your healing isn't just a personal journey. It's a cosmic ripple. Every time you choose self-love, you create a pathway for someone else to do the same. Every time you rise, others feel permission to rise too. That's why they panic. Because your light is contagious. Because your presence demands authenticity. Because your very being speaks a language they try to silence. And now, no matter what they do, they can't unhear it. You are not here to be liked. You are here to liberate. And the more you heal, the more unstoppable you become. You didn't just heal for yourself, whether you realize it or not. Your healing began undoing generations of trauma that lived silently within your bloodline. You were chosen, not because you were the strongest or the loudest or the most perfect, but because you had the courage to look at the pain that everyone else kept running from. That courage disrupted the silence, and the silence is where the damage once grew. They panicked because the silence protected them. It hid the truths, the manipulation, the control, the cycles no one dared to question. You were never supposed to speak. You were never supposed to question. You were only supposed to absorb, to carry, to endure. But you chose differently. You began peeling back the layers. You asked the forbidden questions. You confronted the wounds. And instead of passing them on, you stood in the middle of the fire and said, "It ends with me." They didn't expect that. They thought you'd fold under the pressure, that you'd crumble like the ones before you, that you conformed to the mold carved out long before you were born. But instead, you cracked it open. You broke the agreements no one even remembered making. You unearthed the soul buried beneath survival. And that soul, your true self, emerged radiant. They panicked because your healing isn't just spiritual, it's energetic. When you shift, the field shifts. When you align, old patterns collapse. People feel it before they understand it. That's why some pull away, why others lash out. You become a mirror, and not everyone is ready to see what's been reflected back. Your boundaries began to expose their lack of them. Your clarity highlighted their confusion. Your growth revealed their stagnation. And even when you said nothing, your presence spoke volumes. They wanted you to stay small, not because they hated you, but because your growth forced them to face their own stillness. And that scared them. But you didn't come here to be acceptable. You came to be authentic. You didn't come here to appease comfort zones. You came to dissolve them. And you didn't come here to live a copy of someone else's fear. You came to live your truth, even if your voice shakes, even if the room grows quiet when you speak it. This journey hasn't been easy. Healing rarely is. It rips apart illusions. It reveals truths hidden under loyalty. It forces you to grieve not just people, but identities, versions of yourself you built just to survive. But in those ashes, something divine rises. Not something new, but something ancient that's been waiting to be remembered. The healed you sees differently. You recognize patterns, energies, intentions. You no longer entertain what drains you. You no longer beg to be chosen. You remember that you are. And the more you step into that remembrance, the more they panic. Because now you can't be manipulated through guilt. You can't be silenced with shame. You can't be controlled through fear. You've tasted your own power. And once you do, there's no going back. They feel that power in your absence, in the space you left when you stopped chasing them, explaining yourself, trying to prove your worth. That silence, it's louder than any argument. It speaks of self-respect. It speaks of self-knowledge. And it terrifies those who relied on your confusion to maintain control. Let it. Let your healing continue to unsettle what was never aligned with you. Let your light irritate the darkness that tried to keep you dim. Let your peace be your protest. Because every time you choose you, fully, unapologetically, you are healing more than just yourself. You are healing your past. You are healing your lineage. You are healing the collective. And the world shifts in response to that kind of power. There's a silent revolution happening inside of you, and they can feel it even if they can't name it. You've stopped needing their permission. That alone causes panic. Because when you needed their validation, you were predictable. You could be manipulated, swayed, redirected. But now you're anchored in something far deeper than their opinions. Your own knowing. Your healing gave you vision, not just for the future, but for the past. You began seeing clearly who was never truly for you, who benefited from your self-abandonment, who only showed up when you were dimming. Your clarity exposed the unspoken contracts, the ones that said, if you stay small, I'll stay close. But you broke that contract the moment you chose yourself. That's when the shift began. That's when the panic set in. Not because you became aggressive or loud, but because you became rooted, calm, firm, centered in your truth. And your truth doesn't wobble anymore when someone else doesn't understand it. They panic because you no longer bend under the weight of their confusion. You're not trying to be what they project. You're not shrinking yourself to soothe their insecurities. You're simply being. And that being is powerful beyond measure. See, the old you explained everything. The old you try to justify your evolution. The old you apologize for taking up space, for having needs, for daring to grow. But the healed you just exists. You move differently. You walk with a wisdom that came from crawling through your own darkness. And you no longer wait for someone to see your light. You already know it's there. They panic because they relied on your amnesia. They counted on your forgetfulness, forgetting your worth, your magic, your voice. But healing made you remember. And now that you remember, you don't entertain what insults your soul. You don't explain your intuition. You don't second-guess your boundaries. You honor them like sacred vows, because they are. Your healing revealed who was walking with you, and who was just standing beside you, because you hadn't yet stood up fully. When you did, they fell away. Let them. That's not loss, it's alignment. You see, healing doesn't make life easier. It makes truth unavoidable. And with truth comes clarity. With clarity comes strength. And with strength comes transformation. They panic because they're still hoping for the version of you who tolerated the storm instead of realizing they were the storm. They want the you who asked for permission to be whole, the one who danced around discomfort to maintain fake peace. But that version no longer lives here. Now, you create peace from truth, not avoidance. You build a new foundation, brick by brick, scar by scar. You replace their projections with your presence. And that presence doesn't flinch anymore. It doesn't fold when misunderstood. It doesn't dilute itself to keep people comfortable. They panic because they lost a leverage they didn't even know they had, your unawareness. But now that you're aware, everything is shifting. Your conversations are deeper. Your standards are higher. Your silence is stronger. You don't argue with energy that drains you. You don't chase after what collapses in your absence. You let the chaos reveal itself. You let the masks fall without needing to catch them. And that ease, that spiritual detachment, it terrifies people who build entire stories around your weakness. Let them panic. It's not your job to manage their fear of your growth. You're not responsible for their refusal to evolve. You're responsible for your truth, for your peace, for your legacy, because that's what your healing is building, a legacy, not one of perfection or constant calm, but one of courage. You're showing others what it looks like to choose self over story, to choose awareness over illusion, to choose healing over hiding. That makes you dangerous to every system built on silence. And it makes you sacred to every soul waiting for permission to do the same. You've likely noticed a shift, the quiet distance, the subtle tension, the sideways glances and sudden coldness from people you thought were close. That's not in your head. It's not paranoia. It's not your imagination. It's resistance. Their resistance to your healing. They feel like an invisible pressure, not because you've attacked, accused, or even spoken against them, but because your very presence, now vibrant and clear, no longer allows the old dynamics to exist. The unwritten rules that once defined your relationships no longer apply, and that threatens to comfort those who depended on your silence, compliance, and confusion. They don't panic because you become someone else. They panic because you return to who you've always been. Healing doesn't just restore your joy. It restores your discernment. You start to see what was never real. You begin to recognize how much of what you accepted was merely a reflection of your own unhealed parts trying to earn love. You see the manipulation not as cruelty, but as a system you unconsciously upheld by staying wounded. But now you no longer negotiate with dysfunction. You no longer confuse chaos with passion. You no longer accept crumbs and call it connection. You no longer fear solitude because you've met yourself there. And in meeting yourself, you discovered someone worthy, someone whole, someone who doesn't need to perform to belong. They panic because your healing makes demands, even in silence. It demands respect. It demands reciprocity. It demands authenticity. You're not screaming it. You're not demanding it with threats or ultimatums. But it's in your energy now. It's written in the way you say no without apology. It's etched in the way you say yes without guilt. They can feel it. They feel it in the way you're no longer accessible to drama, in the way your laughter sounds different, deeper, unburdened, in the way your eyes no longer search for approval when you speak, in the way you walk into a room and no longer shrink. Your healing is a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look into it. Some will project, some will flee, some will lash out and call your evolution ego, your boundaries cruelty, your peace arrogance. Let them. Their interpretation of your transformation is not your responsibility. You are not obligated to remain who they knew just because it makes them feel better. What they called love may have been convenience. What they called support may have been control. What they called family may have been obligation dressed in expectation. But now you've learned the difference. You've learned that peace doesn't beg. That love isn't manipulation. That true connection doesn't punish you for growing. They panic because your healing exposes a lie they were living, not because you tried to, but because your truth no longer fits inside their illusion. And the most unsettling part for them, you're not even angry anymore. You're calm. You're grounded. You're watching with compassion, not rage. You've forgiven not for them, but for yourself. Because you've learned that holding on to pain keeps the cycle alive. So you broke it. You broke the cycle by refusing to pass it down. You chose the discomfort of healing over the comfort of dysfunction. And that choice, that power, is what makes them panic. Not because you're better than them, but because you remind them that they could do the same if they were willing. Your life is now a reflection of that willingness. Not perfection, not performance, just presence. Pure, conscious presence that no longer needs to be rescued, seen, or explained. You reclaimed your voice without shouting. You reclaimed your worth without proving. You reclaimed your space without apology. And in doing so, you become the very thing their fear warned them about. Free, not rebellious, not defiant, not difficult, just free. And to those who are still enslaved by expectation, that kind of freedom looks like a threat. But to those who are ready to wake up, you are a lighthouse, a reminder, a way forward. Let them panic. Let them wonder, because you're not here to fit in. You're here to be fully alive. It's a strange paradox. The more peaceful you become, the more chaotic others seem in your presence. Not because you've changed into something aggressive or distant, but because your frequency no longer resonates with what once surrounded you. You step into a new vibrational reality, and that shift sends ripples through every dynamic, every connection, every unspoken agreement that was silently built on your self-abandonment. There was a time when you sacrificed yourself for peace. Now, you understand that any peace that costs you your truth is simply a war in disguise. And so you stopped. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped leaking your energy in places where your light was dimmed, ridiculed, or repackaged for someone else's comfort. You stopped betraying your intuition just to keep things normal. And that's when they noticed. They noticed you didn't show up in the same way anymore. That your presence wasn't given. That your responses were no longer automatic. Your boundaries no longer negotiable. That you are no longer addicted to being needed. This is what healing looks like from the outside. Terrifying to those who only ever related to your wounds. And here's the uncomfortable truth. They didn't just panic because you healed. They panicked because you did it without them. Because your growth revealed something unspoken. They needed you broken. Not maliciously. Not always intentionally. But energetically. They required you to stay in that familiar role. The one who absorbed the blame. The one who always came through. The one who never said no. The one who held everything together while crumbling inside. You were their emotional scaffolding. And now, that scaffolding has been removed. And without it, the facade collapses. Not your fault. Not your responsibility. But undeniably the result of your evolution. You weren't meant to carry what they refused to heal. You weren't designed to be the dumping ground for unresolved pain, for recycled trauma, for inherited shame. But you played the role beautifully, powerfully, loyally, until one day your soul whispered, "This is not who you are. This is what you learned to survive." And so you began to unlearn. You began to breathe again. You began to see clearly. You began to feel not just a hurt, but the joy underneath it, the clarity, the fire, the undeniable knowing that you were made for more than enduring. Your healing was a return, not to who they told you to be, but to who you were before the world tried to shape you. And yes, they panicked, because your healing meant the game was over. They could no longer weaponize your guilt. They could no longer use your loyalty against you. They could no longer pretend not to see your pain, because now you wore it as power, not pity. You became unavailable to manipulation, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And that shift, it's seismic, because when one person heals, every relationship they touch is forced into a reckoning. Some will rise with you, some will resist you, but all will reveal their truth. And in that revelation, you're given the gift of clarity. Painful? Sometimes, but liberating beyond words, because now you see who's real, who's growing, who's pretending, who's only there when you're bleeding, and who can love you in your wholeness, not just your wounds. And most importantly, now you can see you, not the version shaped by survival, not the identity formed by fear, but the radiant, sacred being who always existed beneath the noise. the one who is not too much, the one who never needed to shrink, the one who is finally free. Let them panic, because their panic is simply confirmation. You're no longer playing small. You're no longer ignoring the call. You're no longer sedating your soul. Just be accepted. You are healing, and in doing so, you are disrupting every system built on your silence. You are the tremor before the awakening, the shift before the elevation, the echo of a new lineage rewriting itself through your very breath. They always hoped you'd stay the same. They never said out loud, but every time you try to grow, evolve, or even rest, there was pushback, eye rolls, silent judgments, passive resistance, because they didn't fear you being broken. They feared what would happen if you stopped being. Stop being the one who takes the blame. Stop being the one who carries everyone else's burdens. Stop being the placeholder for their unhealed pain. They didn't want you healed. They wanted you manageable. And when you weren't manageable anymore, they called you selfish, cold, unrecognizable. But here's the deeper truth. You didn't become someone else. You became more you. You peeled back the layers of conditioning, the masks you wore to feel safe, the roles you played to be loved, and underneath it all, you found your essence again. The one who doesn't tolerate abuse for the sake of peace. The one who doesn't overextend just to be needed. The one who remembers, love doesn't ask you to disappear. They panic because you no longer fit in the box they created for you. But you were never meant to fit. You were meant to expand, to grow, to transcend, to awaken. And now, your presence exposes what's stagnant in others. Your clarity disrupts their illusions. Your joy shakes the systems built on sadness. Your inner peace interrupts their chaos. Because when you stop abandoning yourself, you become a mirror, a reflection of what others refuse to face. And for those still running from their truth, you become too much, too honest, too free, too sovereign. They'll say you changed. They'll say you switched up. But what really happened is simple. You returned to yourself. And that return was a revolution. It shook the dynamics. It reset the rhythm. It demanded a new level of reciprocity. No more half-connection. No more one-sided loyalty. No more love that only shows up when you're convenient. You started loving yourself in ways they never learned to, and it frightened them. Because when you finally saw your own worth, they lost control. Your silence was a contract. Your healing was a breach. And you didn't just break the contract. You broke the cycle of playing small so others could feel big, the cycle of guilt-wrapped obedience, the cycle of generational self-sacrifice. You broke it with your voice, your boundaries, your refusal to be who they needed you to be. You didn't scream. You didn't fight. You didn't try to convince anyone. You just rose, and your rising was loud enough. Now they'd panic because they can no longer find you where you used to be. Emotionally, energetically, spiritually, you've elevated. You've stepped into alignment. You've stopped dancing with the ghost of your old self just to be understood. You now live in the light of your truth, and it shows in how you speak, in how you rest, in how you walk away without guilt, in how you protect your peace without apology. This is the part they didn't expect, that your softness could be sharp, that your love could have limits, that your forgiveness didn't mean access. You redefined yourself in the fire, and what came out wasn't a victim, but a force. You didn't just survive them. You evolved because of them. You alchemized the rejection, transformed the abandonment, turned their silence into your sanctuary, their dismissal into your direction, their chaos into your clarity. Now you're not just healing. You're becoming the one who heals others by being whole in a world that still thrives on brokenness. And they panic because you've outgrown the script, because they no longer have a role in the new season of your story, because you remembered your existence is the rebellion, your joy is the resistance, your healing is the prophecy fulfilled. And this is just the beginning. Let them panic while you rise. If this message found you, let it rest in your spirit. Until we meet again, stay awake, stay chosen,